Hospital reporters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order. Welcome to HPANWO TV and welcome to this, my HPANWO TV review of the 10th and final episode of Season 2 of Project Blue Book. And it's called Operation Mainbrace. Now this is, Operation Mainbrace is a real thing. It was a massive naval exercise that took place in 1952 in the North Atlantic, where NATO basically tested itself in a potential wartime situation with the Soviet Union and its bloc. So in other words, screwing up, if there had been a war at that time, a real war between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, that basically Mainbrace was all about how they would handle the naval side of that, the maritime warfare. Now, Timothy Good has written about this and several other people. During Operation Mainbrace, there was some major UFO activity and USO activity reported by the ships from, I think, from 7 different nations. There were like 200 ships, huge fleet of ships. They reported. Sorry, my eyes are a bit itchy. They reported USO and UFO activity. There's kind of a combination of this. So in this fictional scenario of Operation Mainbrace, that basically happens. The ships are at sea, and a giant flying triangle appears, and this was alluded to and mentioned at the end of episode 9. Huge black flying triangle. You know, this, along with the flying saucer, the flying triangle is one of the most commonly reported UFO type craft, the shape of it and everything. Usually black, usually an equilateral triangle, sometimes with lights on it. And this is what is seen by these ships in this scenario, and basically, so it was Senator John F. Kennedy who sends, on his own personal orders, the Project Blue Book duo to investigate this. He doesn't bother with Harding and Valentine. He just says, we want you to go and sort this out. We want you to sort that out himself. So Kennedy says something very interesting. He says, I don't trust my own intel, that is his own intelligence officers, which is kind of prophetic when you consider what happens to him 10 years later. Well, it is interesting actually that Kennedy refers to the fictional assassination of Defence Secretary Fairchild, which happened at the end of Season 1, because of course that's what happened to him in real life, albeit 10 years later. Again, we're jumping around in time a little bit because this is 1953. Operation Mainbrace was the previous year in real life. But again, that's artistic license. And there's a lot of that in Project Blue Book. And in this episode, probably more than any other. Now, what happens is they go... So Quinn and Hynek fly out to this fleet by helicopter. And there's some very good graphics in this, because obviously like these are not real ships they're using. But they've reconstructed in CGI the fleet that was active at the time, including the USS Wisconsin battleship, which is where the main action takes place. And it's very good graphics. It's very like the World of Warships game. I don't know if you've seen the ads for that game, or you may even played it. This new game that's come out. Very good reproductions of ships at sea and the water and the weather, the clouds and the rain and things like that. It's a rough seas, dark, and what happens is these two guys, Quinn and Hynek, have to go out and investigate. Funny thing is that Quinn has these dog tags, which are like military ID badges, which soldiers hang around their neck on a chain. It's kind of one of the symbols of the Vietnam War, particularly. Quinn doesn't. He leaves his behind, and I thought to myself, because he used to carry them around with him and in the war, and he sort of leaves them behind when he goes off on this mission, which is kind of like a symbolic. It's kind of like giving the viewer a clue of what's about to happen. Because that often happens in fiction. I use devices like that myself when I'm writing, because fiction is not like normality. Fiction in a sense has to make sense in a way that normality doesn't. So for everything that happens, there's a kind of setup which you don't explain to the reader or the viewer, but you just tease them with it. And this was one of those elements. The last shot of Quinn leaving his house is like a close-up of the dog tags lying on the table. because something's going to happen to him. You know it, and I just sense something's going to happen to that guy. Now, when they get to the ship, the fleet, the admiral of the fleet is not very cooperative. He doesn't want really Project Blue Book doing any investigation. They walk in and he says, "Oh, I've interviewed the crew, here's their reports, have a look at these." And Hynek says, he puts his foot down, he says, "No, Senator Kennedy ordered us to interview them personally. He didn't ask us to come and pick up your report from your own internal investigation. We have to investigate them." Because this admiral's got it completely into his head that the USOs are Russian. He won't accept any other outcome. He says, this is obviously Russian technology, they've got an advantage on us, etc, etc. So and Hynek says, "Well, maybe it's not Russian." "Oh, of course it's Russian," says the admiral. But in the end, because the admiral, everyone's a bit worried because the admiral seems to be gearing himself up to make this exercise go live. Now that wouldn't happen in real life. There's no way you could an admiral of a fleet could just start a war independently. I mean, there are procedures preventing that, but it's still a good part of the story. Again, artistic license. So Hynek puts his foot down and demands that he and Quinn interview the crew personally. At the same time, there's this incident with Susie. Susie's in custody now. Everyone knows she's a Russian spy. And she says she'll tell the government everything, but she has to have a meeting with Mimi Hynek. So Mimi goes to see her, and Mimi's upset because obviously Susie betrayed her. Susie was the spy who was spying on her, and Mimi didn't know. Because they became good friends, if you remember. In fact, Susie tries to make it more than friends. So Mimi goes to see Susie, and Susie, the generals Harding and Valentine, they get Mimi to go and do it because they want information from her. And then the action goes back to the ship, and you have Hynek and Quinn basically interviewing each crew member who saw this flying triangle. But all of them said didn't see anything, saw nothing at all, nothing to report. It's pretty clear what's happened. There's a cover-up going on, and the admiral has basically ordered these crewmen not to say anything. He's told them what to say to Hynek and to Quinn, and they're just denying all knowledge. That's all. Can I go up? Can I go now? But then one of the crewmen says, they push him a little bit because they can sense that he knows something. He says, "I don't want to end up like them." And well, what does he mean? End up like who? It's kind of like, it's like he's been threatened, and indeed he has. Because there are some crew members that are under close confinement in the brig. In other words, that's the ship's prison. They've been locked in there for some reason. 2 guys. And the reason it turns out, is because they wouldn't they wouldn't do what the admiral told them to, and tell Hynek and Quinn they didn't see anything. So Quinn and Hynek go looking for these, without telling the admiral, they go looking for these unofficial witnesses. And they find them, and they do manage to find a way to interview them. And they find out everything that happened. The flying triangle coming out of the sea, and this thing they call the ghost ship. And they say that this ghost ship kept appearing whenever this flying triangle appeared. First of all, this ghost ship would appear, and so what's that? Says Hynek, and they say, "Oh, it's like a fishing trawler. It just appears in the sea." And the admiral says, "Oh, the ghost ship's there." And so the mystery deepens. What's this ghost ship doing suddenly appearing now? This looks like a normal ship, like a fishing trawler. And they say at the same time you get like electronic malfunctions, and of course that's a common feature of UFO sightings. And it turns out these officers have bargained, have got a bit of a bargain going with the admiral, and they've taken steps to secure their security, secure their safety, because you never know, the admiral might just chuck them in the sea the way he's acting. And it's a hidden camera. It's a camera. They took photographs of this stuff, these things, and they didn't tell the camera, they hid the camera. And they tell Hynek where to go and get it. So Hynek goes and gets the camera. They find themselves a dark room on the ship. Oh yeah, good old fashioned days. You couldn't just like download it to your phone in those days. And they develop these photographs. They create prints of them. And it's a very interesting sequence actually, because you have like these mixtures of the two scenes again, like you had in episode 8. First of all, there's this ticking of a stopwatch, which is they're timing the developing fluid and things like that. Because in the old days, before electronics, you had to like put the films up and like project them onto prints. The prints had to be put in chemicals. Anyone younger than me is wondering what the hell I'm talking about, you know. But that's what you used to have to do with photographs. And you'd actually take your camera to the chemist shop and they'd do it for you. And there's this ticking noise in the background, which is the timer, which Hynek is using. Presumably he knows how to develop film. And this is interspersed with images of Mimi going to the interview room with Susie, where Susie is waiting. And I get the feeling this is some kind of reference to the Doomsday Clock, because at the beginning of the episode, there's a reference to the Doomsday Clock, and you may be familiar with the Paradigm Research Group Disclosure Clock, which is like a clock which is there's only like 15 seconds on it. It's like from quarter to midnight, or 15 points, and there's just one hand, not two hands, and it sort of like goes, when things are getting close to war, like they are with Disclosure, the hand goes up, and when things ease down, they go away. And there's a scene where the Admiral is, at the beginning, where the Admiral's talking to one of his officers, and he says, they've reset the Doomsday Clock again, it's 2 minutes to midnight. Oh my goodness, and so everyone's scared. Midnight is when you have all-out war and the world ends. 2 minutes to midnight. That's a song, actually, by Iron Maiden, 2 minutes to midnight. Yeah. And so there's these merging of the scenes. It's all very spooky. It's very good. It's very good filmmaking, actually. It's very, very tense. There's a lot of tension. And so in the Hynek, on the ship, Hynek and Quinn they show this admiral. They show him the print and they say, "Look, there's a flying triangle. It's aliens. It's a UFO." The admiral says, "No, that's just Russians. That's obviously Russians." And then suddenly, though, all the lights go off on the ship. And you suddenly realise that something's about to happen, and then the ghost ship appears. So is the flying triangle coming next? So Mimi and Susie have their little discussion in the interview room, and Mimi's very upset, and Susie gets emotional and asks Mimi to deliver a message to somebody. And she writes down the address of her KGB handler. In other words, that's committing suicide, essentially. She's basically turning supergrass, which is what some spies do in that situation. If you're a spy and you're apprehended while on a mission behind enemy lines, there's several things that could happen to you. You could end up in jail like George Blake did. He was jailed for 42 years before he escaped in a spectacular fashion, as I've done an entire video on that. Or very often you're offered a deal. They can say, "Okay, we won't jail you. We'll drop charges against you. We'll grant you immunity from prosecution on one condition: you work for us from now on. Don't tell your handlers, keep doing your stuff with your handlers, but you're reporting to us." In other words, they turn you into a double agent. Susie has decided to give the US authorities basically blow open the entire KGB network operating in her, which she's a part of. And she did it in exchange for this meeting with Mimi. So why is she so keen to meet Mimi? Well, all is revealed, but she embraces Mimi at the last moment, and she's pulled apart by the guards. So the ghost ship is actually boarded. The sailors on board the ship, the admiral orders that it's boarded, and they board it and they find it empty. But then, and it turns out it's a Chinese trawler registered in Shanghai. So what the hell is it doing in the North Atlantic? Now that's interesting, because Quinn and Hynek they decide to go over and have a look without telling the admiral. So they get in a boat, and God knows how they managed to get hold of that boat, this launch. And so they get in the launch and they go across to the boat, and they find, firstly, the fuel tank is full. Then they find out that from the ship's log that it left its home port in China 2 days ago. And then they find a crewman on board. What's interesting is they find the crewman first is scared. Well, it turns out he's the captain, and everyone else abandoned ship when lights appeared where they were fishing, which was in China, but he didn't. So what's obviously happened is the ship has been transported from the coast of China to the North Atlantic Ocean by something. And again, this is like teleportation, and this does happen, where things in the presence of UFOs will kind of like they'll just sort of like move. They'll move from one place to another suddenly. Timothy Good reports on this a lot. He reports especially on aircraft being transported from one place to another. For example, a friend of his in Puerto Rico, who was actually a British Airways pilot, who took a light aircraft out. It had something very strange. He was flying across the island of Puerto Rico, which of course is a weird place generally, because there's reports of secret bases on there. There's the chupacabra and things like that. But he was flying along in this plane, and he goes into a bank of fog. He comes out of the bank of fog, and the plane has moved 50 miles to the south. How did that happen? No one knows. So this is kind of the thing we're talking about that is brought into Project Blue Book, which is very, very interesting. It's interesting they included this element. It's fascinating actually how many real ufological cases or ufological elements are actually included by the filmmakers in this series. Another thing that's interesting about the ship, it has experienced something strange. For example, fused material. They look at the wood on the wheel, and it's like it's melted. Or you can't melt wood, you just burn it. But it's like it's melted into like melted plastic or something. And the glass on the windows has fused and melted as well. Now this is an effect you see with the Philadelphia experiment. What's the thing that's reported with USS Eldridge, which this happened in 1941, allegedly. Al Bielek talks about this. This guy I mentioned, connected to the Montauk project. A ship from, oops, I'm knocking the camera around. A ship from the US Navy was used in an experiment using high-powered electromagnetic energy. Now, there's a book written by Charles Berlitz about this. It's an interesting book. Whether it's true or not, again, I know there's some questions over whether it actually happened, and indeed I'm dubious about it, to be honest. I'm not sure. I think it's unlikely. But it's possible it's real. What they reported was the plan was to make this ship invisible to radar. And basically it's a kind of like a degaussing thing, where in fact the degaussing is where you put electromagnetic fields through a ship, and it becomes it doesn't become invisible to radar, but it becomes non-magnetic, which means it can't be detected using magnetic detectors. It can't detonate magnetic influence mines, things like that. So a lot of ships and submarines are degaussed. However, the plan for Eldridge was to make it invisible to radar using this electromagnetic energy, this generator on board the ship. What happened instead is the ship became completely invisible. It vanished. And legend has it that this ship travelled. It actually teleported. It moved from one place to another under the influence of this massive electromagnetic field. And horrible things happened. Some of the crew members were, their very bodies were fused into the hull of the ship, and they died a horrible death that way. Some of them started spontaneously combusting, just bursting into flames. Like you may have heard stories of spontaneous human combustion. This was happening everywhere. Some of them lost their minds and went mad. Some of them disappeared. Some of them vanished in thin air. Reappeared later on in a different place, some of them. Oh, it was horrible. Honestly, hazardous duty pay for those guys, I think. So it feels as if that the producers of Project Blue Book have been influenced by this story of the Philadelphia experiment. Possibly. Anyway, the captain of the ship tells his story, this Chinese captain, that he was just fishing with his men one day, and this USO appears underneath the ship. And the other crewmen get into the lifeboats and they bugger off. He stays with the ship. But it seems that this USO captures this vessel and moves it to where it's found. Now, it's very important. It's very important to remember that, because that comes up later, this thing about moving ships. But the captain talks about cities under the sea, and he's obviously referring to alien bases beneath the sea. Very interesting indeed. Mimi, in the meantime, goes back home, and she goes to her son's room, Joel, her son, because Susie whispers to her that she left something in there for Joel's room, and it's quite poignant actually, because as I said, there's spoilers here, so just to warn you. And it's quite a sad moment, because Of course, Susie has a daughter, as we found out. She wanted to move her to the United States. It turns out her daughter is in the United States and living with a foster family nearby. So Mimi finds a letter from Susie to her daughter and a photograph of her daughter. And so she takes these to the foster family and gives them to her, and the little girl comes out and says, "Is Mummy coming?" Of course, Mummy's not coming. Mummy's in custody. It's very sad. But anyway, the foster family accept these things from Mimi, which has been delivered by Susie. That's kind of where the Susie story ends for this season. Anyway, the Admiral arrests Quinn and Hynek as a result of what happens. But as they're being taken away to custody, the ghost ship is there. So the USO appears, bright lights underneath the sea, and of course the Admiral still thinks it's Russian. But then he says it's obviously Russian, and along with this flying triangle, this USO triangle, the sonar, the ship's sonar picks up more undersea targets. And so the captain immediately sounds battle stations, prepare the depth charges, things like that. So anyway, in the confusion of the battle stations being called, Quinn and Hynek escape. And then Quinn goes down to this place where there's a mini submarine. Now I don't know if this particular class of battleship actually really did have mini submarines on board, but who cares? Artistic license again. It's used big time in this episode. It's like a mini sub, like a little small submarine, which is in a bay or airlock at the bottom of the ship. And so Quinn gets in the submarine and he persuades Hynek to operate the airlock. So Hynek floods down the airlock and opens the doors which allow the mini sub out. And then so once Quinn is in this mini sub, who it turns out he did learn to pilot one once. I mean, he can do anything, Quinn, can't he? So ufologist, pilot, submarine pilot, why not? So then Hynek rushes back to the bridge and he says to the Admiral, "Don't fire. Quinn's down there in a mini-sub, so don't launch your depth charges." Because they're worried that he's about to declare war on a bloody interdimensional, interplanetary species. Not the Russians, but it could be even worse, you know. And then Quinn goes deep, he dives the submarine down and he sees an alien base, and he says it's beautiful, this city under the sea. And this is rather like the film The Abyss. If you've not watched The Abyss, it's a James Cameron film, well worth watching, really good film. And anyway, the Admiral says, "Look, well, I'm not going to put the entire world at risk just because some idiot goes in a submarine. Open fire, open fire." So they start launching these depth charges. Anyway, Quinn phones, he uses the radio. It wouldn't be a radio, it'd be like a Gertrude, which is like an ultrasonic communication system used through water, because radios don't work underwater, because water's a radio shield. So he gets on the Gertrude and he says, "Don't fire, it's not Russians." But by that time the depth charges are on their way down. They detonate and the submarine is hit, and you see the submarine being hit by a depth charge. And then, it's an awful moment, because next scene is the Project Blue Book office, and everything's been to Faye is very sadly, the secretary, she's very sadly taking down all the notices off the incident board, and she's sort of crying. You see Valentine standing there with a flag, a folded flag, which you have at a military funeral, and he just says, "It's all been covered up. We'll say it was humpback whales and bioluminescence." Looks like Quinn didn't have any family. You suddenly realised that Michael Quinn is dead. You know, it's a sad moment. And Hynek is in a real state, because he can't. He feels guilty, of course, because he was a part of this. And he, like I said in the last thing, he and Quinn have become very close. They're like partners. You know, and Mimi's trying to comfort him, but Quinn is like, he's gone. You've got to let him go. But Hynek has this feeling that Quinn has survived, and he does it by checking all ship disappearances on a map of the world, and where some of them reappear, and using he starts drawing things on this map, and he creates a symbol on the map, and that symbol is the symbol we've been seeing throughout the entire 2 seasons of Project Blue Book. The symbol that was at the MK Ultra lab, the mind control lab. You see it projected on the screen. The symbol appears at the crop circle in that strange guy's garden, like the triangles with the lines and the circles on. And he suddenly realises, by plotting where the submarine was, because the submarine was never found, it was hit by the depth charge and it's presumably sunk to the bottom of the sea with Quinn on board, dead. But what if Quinn was transported in the same way the ghost ship was? This is what Hynek works out. And what's more, he works out from finding out where the ghost ship went to here and where other ships. He's plotting where ships disappear and reappear. And he suddenly realises he thinks he now knows where Quinn is going to reappear. And so he goes to the southern point of Chile in South America, because that's the last stop before Antarctica, because he believes Quinn's in Antarctica. And he meets up with Mr. Fixer, who's going to help him find Quinn. And the final scene is a ship heading towards Antarctica with Hynek aboard, off to find his long lost partner, Captain Michael Quinn. And that's the end. Now this is good because it ends it ends with this very, very untied finish. There's definitely an open end to this, which means there's going to be a season 3. It's possible, I hope, and I don't know, nothing's been announced personally. Maybe I could ask Dave Altman, because, you know, Dave Altman, who often comments on my videos, he's directly involved with this production because he's a colleague of one of the major cast members. Maybe he could tell me something that he, you know, has not been published yet, in which case, if he gives me permission, I'll let you know. Maybe it can come up on the live stream that's upcoming. But it could be there's a season 3 already being contracted, it's already been signed up, and they're going to go into production. I hope so. I bloody hope so. Now the season didn't end as I expected, because, as I said, at the end of episode 8 specifically, which I thought was excellent, episode 8 was fantastic, you feel there's a build-up towards some kind of major UFO disclosure event involving the entire public, which, of course, is how season 1 ended. It ended with the Washington invasion, and you get the feeling something like that's going to happen again, and it doesn't. Episode 9, as I said, is kind of like episode 9 is almost an interlude, as I explained. It's kind of, you know, they've got to defuse the bomb. The UFOs don't really play much of a role in it, but they've got to defuse the bomb, etc. Episode 10 is not really a conclusive episode of the entire season. The season doesn't conclude, which is in a way disappointing, but is not really, because it leaves the door well and truly open for a season 3. So in a way I'm quite glad it ended the way it did. So we're going to find out now, hopefully soon, whether Hynek can find his friend and partner and colleague, Captain Michael Quinn. Of course, like, it's interesting that season 1 ended in Antarctica too, because season 1 ended with Mr. Fixer finding this obelisk, this glowing obelisk in Antarctica, and maybe that's why Hynek went for Mr. Fixer, or Mr. Fixer approached him. I don't know. I can't remember which it was actually, but they meet at this remote area in South America just before Hynek goes off to Antarctica. Hynek's wearing sunglasses. He looks really like he doesn't want to be recognised, because he must be quite famous. So it's a cliffhanger. In summary, this entire season 2 of Project Blue Book, top marks. It is as good as season 1, and it's loaded with these exopolitical ideas. It's not like, it's very different, it's different from season 1 in the sense that, I've made this point many times, that it's more like a serial rather than season 1 where you had independent episodes with a small story arc linking them. This was definitely serialized. I felt that this was definitely serialized. This is why I felt it was leading up to something in a similar way season 1 did with a disclosure thing. You know, there may be some kind of disclosure event. Fictional, of course, but maybe even leading on to some kind of major revolutionary incident into which the program or the series becomes an alternative history, like my Roswell trilogy. That hasn't happened, which I say is good in one way and bad in another. It's good because it means it's carrying on into season 3, which I hope will be produced. I look forward to that. If you've heard anything, Dave, do let me know. But generally speaking, I mean, there's no major exopolitical drive throughout this season, but each episode, and indeed the story generally, has exopolitical themes in the same way season 1 did. This idea that there are aliens out there. We know they exist. We are told, the viewer is told without doubt, that there are extraterrestrials and they exist. We are told that there is a cover-up and suppression of this information, of which Project Blue Book is a part, in which Hynek and Quinn don't know about that. Well, they're not supposed to know about that, but they do find out. We know that there is internal conflict involving the CIA, and they have different agendas. We know that this is embodied in the figure of Daniel Banks, Dan, the CIA man, who comes into the series. Allegedly, you think he's on their side and he's working with Hynek and Quinn on their sort of freelance mission, but then he does the dirty on them at the Robertson panel, and you suddenly realise he's just a CIA plant designed to try and bring down Project Blue Book. Which means that in terms of the authorities, they don't have a single agenda regarding this issue. So it's almost like a QAnon situation where there's this kind of almost internal disclosure conspiracy which is working against the truth embargo, as Stephen Bassett calls it. Now, this was not really explored in any detail within season 2. Maybe it will be in season 3, should it be produced. But this is definitely hinted at, and I'm curious to see where this leads, if it leads anywhere. There's a few more untied ends. For example, we haven't seen General Harding doing his LSD trip. I was hoping we'd see that, because that would be quite amusing. If he does really have a meeting with God, you know, I mean, that would... Hopefully we'll see that in season 3, because as you know, in episode 8, he buys some LSD off Daniel Banks. I explained that in my review. Now, it's actually quite amusing, I think, that in a sense the climactic episode, it's the structure of season 2 is different from season 1 in another way. I really feel that the climactic episode of season 2 was episode 8. I kind of feeling that maybe episode 8 should have been episode 10. They should have reversed the order of the episodes, or maybe they deliberately did it like that. They deliberately had this kind of exopolitical denouement, this climactic exopolitical element in episode 8, and then 9 and 10 were kind of an epilogue, which they put in afterwards again, maybe to set up the situation for season 3 in which Quinn goes missing. Because you couldn't really do that. Come to think of it, it makes sense, because you couldn't really have the two together. You'd have to have the exopolitical climax, and then the situation where basically they go to investigate another case after that climax, and Quinn then disappears, and that kind of is the setup for the next season. That's the open end by which they can have season 3. We've got to know what happens to Quinn. Will Hynek find him? Is he alive? Is he dead? He's in Antarctica. He's in big trouble, isn't he? What did the aliens do with him? Did he escape from the submarine at all? Will the wreck of the submarine be found on the seabed with Quinn's body in it? We'll find out. Anyway, that's the end of Project Blue Book Season 2. And you know what? I'm going to miss it. I've been doing a review every day now since I got like self-isolated. Now I'm back at work. I'm back at work now, only for 3 days a week. Sorry, only for 3 hours a week. But I'm back at work every day now, but just for 3 hours a day. 3 hours a day, not every 3 hours a week. So I'm not back to full work yet, but it's better than nothing. And I've been carrying on. Project Blue Book has been a big part of the extra free time I've had, and it's gone, and I'm going to miss it. It's funny, you know. Of course, I can go and watch it all again if I want, and I probably will actually, because I hope I want to maybe write a review for UFO Truth magazine. Probably that's what I want to do. But it's sad it's over. It often happens when you come to the end of something really good, isn't it? It's like the end of a really good holiday. You don't want it to end. I didn't want this to end. I'm really enjoying it. I'm getting into it. But it looks like it's going to be a season 3. So it's open-ended, so hopefully there'll be a season 3. But it's for now, it's over, and I'm like, what do I do now? It's, you know, I felt the same at the end of the Citizen hearing. Do you remember 2013, the Citizen hearing? I was really into it. I rushed home every day from work. I mean, because of the place I live in because I live in a place which is quite convenient actually, because of the time difference. I would get home from work just after the Citizen hearing had got going, and so I could spend all evening watching it, and I really got into it. I got hooked on it, and I was really watching all the episodes, all the different hearing sessions with Stephen Greer as there, Gary Heseltine, Nick Pope, Steve Bassett, and all the witnesses to the Rendlesham Forest incident, people like that. It was just, and I was just really getting into it. It became like a big real life soap opera, and I was talking to my friends about it, like Colin and Richard Wright and these other people, Colin Wolford, you know, and we were sort of like talking about it on the phone, and you know, what's happening now, things like that. And I did like Citizen hearing specials on HPANWO Radio. That's when I interviewed Stanton Freeman, I interviewed Steve Bassett, and I interviewed, who was it, Peter Robbins. That was before we fell out. It was like, and then suddenly when it was over, it was the end, last session, last day. It was like, I got that. I did have that kind of end of a good holiday feeling, you know. And I've got to go back to normal. No Citizen hearing to focus on. Blah. And I feel a bit like that now, which is a testimony to how good Project Blue Book actually is. Because if it wasn't any good, then I wouldn't feel that way. But it was good. It was excellent. So congratulations to everyone, David O'Leary, the creator, the entire production team, including Dave Altman, who I know, all the cast members. Well done, all of you, for what you've done, because you brought out a series which is absolutely unique. It's the most exopolitical series of all, I think. I mean, the original Project Blue Book TV series from the 70s. I've talked before about how different that was, because it's similar in its plot. It's about 2 US Air Force Project Blue Book guys who go around investigating things. Hynek's not in it, it's just 2 fictional guys. But you know, there's never any idea. Sometimes they find out it's a UFO and they can't explain it. Other times it turns out it's a trick. Other times it's like tricks. It's like natural phenomenon. So you wouldn't know when you're going into this program exactly what would happen at the end. And I watched that when I was a kid, which means I must have had an interest at a young age in the subject, although it wasn't a big part of my life like it is now. But never ever was there any idea. It had an optimistic, quite naive theme to it, rather like Close Encounters. There was never any suggestion that the government were in any way lying. There was nothing exopolitical about this. Project Blue Book. Today's Project Blue Book is the original series was called Project UFO, by the way. You can watch them on YouTube if you want. Made in sort of late 70s. Today's Project Blue Book is very different. It's much darker. It has the theme of deceit and deception and government manipulation and, you know, misdirection of the public. All these things are in it. It's like the X-Files or even more so. It is much more like the X-Files than it is Project UFO. But it's in a sense, it's even more exopolitical and conspiratorial than the X-Files. Much more so. Which is why I think it's the most remarkable UFO paranormal conspiratorial TV series that I've seen, that I've heard of. Absolutely unique. And I think it could have, it in itself could have some kind of effect. Is it a cause or effect? That's another point. Is it simply a product? As has often happened, art imitates life, and sometimes life imitates art. So which is it in this case, or is it a bit of both? Because I did find it interesting that when the first season of Project Blue Book was in production, we got the ATIP revelations, December 2017. It was that, which incredibly good luck actually, because then the first season then started a couple of months later, and the iron was hot to be struck. Remarkable, isn't it? No, sorry, I'm getting my dates mixed up, because It was actually the following year, sorry. The series started the following year. But it was just interesting. It was still, I think, ripe to create an audience. And again, in a sense, it could be a cause of something, because people are going to watch it. It's going to give them ideas. And they are going to be influenced by it. They're going to be inspired by it. And when real life UFO stories come about, including the vastly increased profile and change the way UFOs have changed, the way their perception, the way they're presented has permanently and irrevocably been changed, the way the media present them to us. Could Project Blue Book, the TV series, have influenced the public mood which created that situation? Quite possibly. So it is both a cause and an effect of this disclosure process, should it be happening. I think the next step is to sort of open it out to you guys, which means the next video I'll be doing will almost certainly be the Project Blue Book Season 2 live stream. So what will happen is just keep an eye on the channel, because soon after I upload this video, probably within about 24 hours of that or less, I will upload the notice for the live stream. The live stream will be probably about 7 PM. It'll either be Wednesday or Friday, I'm not sure, but hopefully one of those days, hopefully no later. Not Thursday, because I'm doing the HPANWO show. Not Tuesday, because I've got something else that night. I've got to do something else actually for a video. My ear's itching now. Oh God. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been great. It's been a great series, great 10 video series that I've done for Project Blue Book. I've really enjoyed it. It's not over yet, because we're having the live stream, and then we sit back and wait for Season 3, which of course I will be talking about. You'll hear all about it, exclusive and live on HPANWO TV. Thank you very much for watching said HPANWO TV. Hospital Porters, pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order.